Welcome to Telewizja Republika. The story of Moscow shopping mall shooting, the thing that media all over the world try to analyze, is a thing that we actually have seen in the past. Well, of course, it wasn't the same shopping mall, it wasn't the same place, it wasn't the same city. However, it was the same state, and the president of Russian Federation was the same person. Of course, not since the first event of that kind on Vladimir Putin's turn, or shift, should I say, because back in 1999, at least when the operation of Moscow building bombings were organized, when it started being prepared, Vladimir Putin wasn't the Prime Minister of Russia yet. He was, however, the Chief of Federal Security Bureau, FSB, the infamous intelligence and counterintelligence agency that stepped into the shoes of infamous KGB, which actually was walking in the shoes of infamous NKWD. All of those organizations, criminal organizations, were controlled by Russian state. The thing is that when the 1999 Moscow, and not only Moscow, building bombings occurred, when those things were revealed to the general public, the man who was in charge was, back then, Nikolai Patrushev, number 2 in Kremlin by now. When the thing happened, Vladimir Putin was prime minister and was preparing himself to be a president of Russia. We know today that he is a ruler of Russian Federation till those days. Last week in New York Post, 2 of our friends, Mark Toth and Jon Sweet, wrote a very interesting article about the consequences and the way that intelligence analysts look at this kind of event, should I say. The terrorist attack is an event, of course. And in terms of definition, surely the shooting in Moscow was a terrorist attack. But the question is, who actually rented or who actually hired those terrorists? Who are the people who were executing and killing people in Moscow? Who was behind them and who was paying them the money? Of course, the people who were shooting and killing men over there could think that they are martyrs and they are fighting for Islam, and they could be true believers in Islam. But the thing is that the tradition of using Islamic terrorists by the Russian Federation and Russian secret services, as our viewers know very well, is very long history. It started years ago when KGB and FSB and other organizations of this kind were using the terrorists from Islamic State to attack Western states and Western politicians and Western societies. It's quite possible, and this is what our tonight guests are arguing, that Russia, in a way, was trying to fool US intelligence services, the Western intelligence services, and try to feed them with the information about the expected attacks so they can use it as a leverage in the future to justify the answer that is going to be directed in the same direction, mainly Ukraine. Russia is at war with Ukraine. Russia is invading Ukraine, and Russia is trying to look for ways to end this war, to win this war. It's not going as good as they were hoping to. The 3-day expedition turned to 3 years war, and actually, a couple of days before this shooting occurred, the representatives of Russian regime stated that actually they are not on a special military operation anymore, but that they are fighting a real war. You can join us on rachoń.com, that's our website. we will come back to you with the reports from front lines of the war against the West that we are trying to cover if you leave us your email, because that's what we are going to talk about on my show. My name is Michał Rachoń. This is Rachoń. And we roll in. And our guest tonight is Colonel Jon Sweet, a man that we know very well, a friend of our show, a man with 30 years of experience within the defense intelligence enterprise as an U.S. Army military intelligence officer. Colonel Sweet served with the famous 101st Airborne Division and the Intelligence and Security Command. He also led the U.S. European Command Intelligence Engagement Division from 2012 to 14. He's also an author of excellent, insightful opinion pieces with his writing partner and a friend of our show, Mark Toth, and a regular guest on our program. Welcome back, sir. Great to see you again.
Hey, thanks for having me back on the show. It's always a great opportunity to talk what's going on in Ukraine with you.
We always talk about the serious stuff. You are dealing with serious stuff, and your expertise with Mark Toth always touches upon those kind of things. So again, we are here to talk about the shooting in Moscow, based on text that you published, both of you published in New York Post. And actually, you are arguing the thing that many experts on Russian intelligence points. You are arguing that generally Federal Security Bureau, FSB, Russian intelligence service, is capable of conducting a false flag operations because we, as you finish your text, as we all seen this movie before, and you are starting with the journey of 1999, Moscow, Buyansk, and some other apartment bombings. What do you make of those of this knowledge that we have or had in the past, and how do you apply it to what we actually know by now about the latest event in Moscow?
Sure. Look, there's always been a record with Putin and his ability to leverage the FSB to accomplish or set conditions that set him up or set Russia up for success. And of course, the apartment bombings were one. It gave a justifiable excuse, Islamic extremists in Moscow and throughout Russia. And it gave him a reason to go back into Chechnya, which is where they said that the attacks were directed in order to overrun and in a sense conquer the country. So that is there. The other pattern that we see, and we wrote about this when Hamas attacked Israel. If you recall, we said that Putin's fingerprints were on this, and what we saw was a meeting with Hamas officials several weeks prior to the actual incident that occurred on 7 October. Well, what we're seeing here also, another pattern, is we see that on February 29th, members of Hamas and Fatwa, the leadership there within the Middle East in those two organizations, was in Moscow on the 29th of February. And of course, the attack occurred on 22 March. So we see the patterns, we see the capabilities, and we see what could transpire. It certainly leads credence to the thought that maybe the FSB had something to do with this, or at least were complicit in letting it happen.
Okay, you are going much further because this is basically the knowledge that people have, and this is the thing. If someone reads books and knows the official data that is known by now about those things from 1999 and latest stuff like Nord-Ost, Dubrovka, the list goes on, our viewers know it very well. But you go further. You claim in your text that actually part of this disinfo operation was to try to convince U.S. intelligence community that it was real ISIS terror attack, whatever you call it. Could you try to explain your point of view and the obvious question: did they manage to convince U.S. intelligence that it was ISIS?
Yeah, so the first point is, in order to make a deception work, the deception has to be believable, okay? So you have to establish a story or a backstory to make the deception believable. ISIS is the boogeyman. ISIS is a known threat, an Islamic extremist that had caused much problems throughout the early 2000s and upwards to 2014. So ISIS is a believable boogeyman, an Islamic extremist. Getting the United States intelligence agencies to come to a conclusion that there was planning being done by ISIS that would result in an attack on Moscow facilities of concert halls or other large gatherings may have just been an opportunity to present that as a possible outcome when this occurred. What's interesting, though, of course, the threat message was put out on 7 March. 15 days later is when the incident actually occurred. What you'll see, though, during that 15-day period, we don't see an increase in security. We don't see an increase in checkpoints. What we do see, though, is that on the evening of the event, there were no Americans at the event. And as far as I know, there were no Westerners at the event either. That the preponderance of the casualties were Russians, ethnic Russians, Russians from Moscow, Russians who have influence. Okay, so in our mind, as we look at this and we try to analyze who benefits from this type of attack, you have to look at this and say, it's trying to bring a population in that has so far not been affected by the war, trying to get them to be galvanized, to be now brought into the war, supporting Russia. And incidentally, you'll see that while ISIS was initially blamed because, again, the boogeyman, the blame shifted then to Ukraine and has now shifted from the FSB director and also from Putin has shifted now to the United States and France and Great Britain as far as who planned and operated this. So the web keeps getting deeper and deeper and more information gets thrown at it and to convolute what happened. They don't want to address the lapse in security.
Yeah, but we got the differences, and this is my another question. The difference between what is going on right now and what happened back in 1999 is that we do have real international actors present in the geopolitical context. Back in 1999, we were thinking about the internal politics, we were thinking about the election, about the war against Chechnya, the nation that was trying to separate itself from Russia. Now, we got a war in Ukraine with the strong support of United States, of NATO states, of different foreign actors. You are arguing and you are showing very interesting possible scenario. If I understood it correctly, one of the possible scenarios of this kind of disinfo campaign was actually feeding US intelligence with information about the possible attack in the future so that US intelligence would be lured in a way into the communication situation in which it, for example, sends a message to Russia, we are expecting a major attack in Moscow, so that Russia can use it after the attack. Well, Americans knew it in advance, so they are the perpetrators. Is that the possible pattern that we are talking about?
I'm not necessarily sure that America being the perpetrators, but what I do think is that they were able to use American intelligence to validate Islamic extremists as being the people who did the attack. Okay, and then that gave them, this Islamic extremist group is attacking us. But then that didn't fit. I mean, that fit the short-term narrative. Okay, don't get me wrong. It created this huge event, but it didn't create the narrative of what are we going to do about it? Because obviously Ukraine was involved, the United States was involved. That transitioned over. But in order to make it believable initially, they had to have a bad guy, and ISIS fit that mold. And isn't it interesting that Hamas was there just 3 weeks prior to that incident? And oh, by the way, wasn't ISIS eradicated by the United States 5-6 years ago? How does ISIS have the capability, the logistics capability, and the command and control to have teams go in and out of Russia, to have the weapons, to get by security, to get out? How is all that possible in a security state? It just seems when you look at it and you start peeling back the onion and you start looking at the story, it just all seems to fall apart. There's other stories now, and I'm sure you've seen them in Nexta, about the possibility that security forces were in the vicinity but did not react. Rapid reaction teams were present and heard the events going on but did not react. If they didn't plan it and direct it, they certainly were complicit in letting it happen. So to create the incident, to create the controversy and the outrage for a Russian population that supposedly, 88% of them voted for Putin. But
But that's,
does he have?
I was just looking at my phone so that I can quote the things that are related to this aspect that you just mentioned, because we know that the history of involvement or actually treating the Islamic terrorists as assets by KGB and FSB, this is a long story. And back in 2006, year before he died, 2005, sorry, year before he died or actually was killed, Alexander Litvinenko gave an interview in which he claimed that couple of high profile Islamic terrorists were actually assets of KGB, and he is referring to let me just quote it. He is referring, among others, to Yasser Arafat, Carlos the Jackal, and he is mentioning Saddam Hussein, who is not a terrorist per se. He's a figure, political figure. He was a political figure, but he was also treated, according to Litvinenko, former KGB and FSB officer back then, on the run from Russia, that they were actually the assets of the Russian intelligence. So the story goes really deep. We can add Ion Mikhail Pacepa, who died 2 years ago. Your take on this? What is the meaning of this kind of history in this relationship?
They're useful. Okay, the friend of my friend is, the friend of my enemy is my friend, right? So we get to that point. And again, I think in some cases, the individuals that were brought in to conduct this operation were used. They were used. They were found. They were paid, and they became martyrs, and they will become martyrs. But it's kind of like what they do in the mafia, right? And the mafia hires someone to do a hit, and then they kill the hitman, so you can't connect the hit back to the person who sanctioned the event. It's a little bit like that, in my opinion. I believe that the individuals that were involved in this incident were hired, and they believed that they were doing something in the name of Islam, and that they were actually conducting an operation. And they probably suspected that they would be martyrs, and they didn't expect to live, I'm sure. But nonetheless, they were sacrificed to make a point, to create an incident, to cause outrage within Moscow, not international outrage within Moscow to generate support. And now we're seeing other provocations that are going on, right? We're seeing a provocation now in Belarus where they're threatening the Suwalki Gap again. Lukashenko's there watching military exercises and saying that that's what they want. We're starting to see more activity in Serbia again. We're starting to see other provocations. We just had a missile fly over Poland. So you're seeing increased provocations. Putin needs a NATO provocation to continue to justify what he says is the threat against Mother Russia, the threat to their independence and the threat to their security. And he said that on state television. He needs that. I don't believe he has 88% of the support. I believe he has obviously less. We believe the numbers are lower than what the polls were. But nonetheless, he's in trouble, and he's trying to create something that rallies the Moscow elites.
You are finishing your text for New York Post with a reference to the movie that we all have seen, or you have all seen, because it's actually related directly to the U.S. intelligence community. So, what was the game plan in terms of making Western states think in exact manner, in certain manner about this, what happened?
So I think part of it was to provide what I would say, to provide cover, to establish the story, and they needed a reliable asset to present the possibility that ISIS, the boogeyman, ISIS was involved in the event. So they created that event. U.S. intelligence reported on that and did the right thing. They looked at it, they said, we have communications between groups that are planning, and they did the right thing. They alerted the Russian government, who promptly ignored it and said it was propaganda by the United States. So from that perspective, the U.S. became a tool in the story. Okay, now that story is not panning out because, quite frankly, they've shifted it to Ukraine and to the U.S. in the NATO countries. Now it's all about, see, look what they're doing to us. They're attacking us. Now Russia is a victim again. I mean, how do you invade a country but not, and in 25 months later you're the victim because certain events are occurring to you. You know, your oil refineries are getting bombed. I got it. Invasions of the country by anti-Putin forces in Volgograd, and now we have another Russian ship that was sunk in the Black Sea. So it's been a bad week for Russia, and it will continue to be bad.
Okay, let's move. Maybe one more technical question. You are also trying to focus our attention on, as a readers, on one of the aspects that I didn't think of before, that it was quite a long time between the arrival of the security in that mall. It took some time, probably too long time as far as I understand. Is that correct?
I believe the time that was that's been quoted in a number of articles was about an hour to an hour and a half for a reaction force that literally was within blocks from the facility. So the question is, did they let it play out? Okay, did they let the event occur? Did they allow for the maximum number of casualties to be committed, and then they let them leave? It's interesting though. How the story was that when they left, that they went towards the Ukraine border, and then the next day, Lukashenko comes out and says, no, they were coming to Belarus, and then we blocked them, then they turned around. So clearly he didn't get the message, he didn't get the story, and he wasn't able to support it by inadvertently saying something that ran against the narrative. No, so there are a lot of questions about you've seen the video of the terrorists walking through the concert hall shooting people.
Yeah.
You don't see a reaction. And I'll be honest with you, I haven't seen all the videos, but I didn't see any checkpoints. I didn't see any armed security guards. At the initial outbreak, you didn't see a lot of excitement. Now, there is a story that I've seen, and granted, the sourcing is questionable just because it's a Twitter story that shows what they say are FSB agents in the audience observing the activity, and then 2 hours later, they're actually at the site in which they're catching the individuals that committed the event and cutting off the ear. And you can see the picture of the man on the video is the same picture of the man who was cutting the ear off the terrorist. So it does make you wonder, were they there?
What the hell they were doing for the time, yeah.
Were they dictating? Were they orchestrating? Was it planned? Was everything going towards the timeline? So look, there's just too many coincidences here that when you look at it, it's just like, Again, the first report's always wrong, but the first report in this case was ISIS, and that story quickly fell apart. Then it was Ukraine, and that story fell apart. Then it's the West orchestrated this. And then as you start seeing these other videos and these other stories come out, it's like, well, they were complicit. They didn't stop it. They let it happen. And oh, by the way, how does this happen in a police state? How does ISIS, that didn't exist 3 years ago, now ready and able to pull off an operation that, quite frankly, would be very hard for the FSB or CIA to pull off in a short amount of time? How does that happen? It only happens if you have complicity, in my opinion.
Yeah, the thing is that when all those stories fall apart, it's less than a week since it began, you come back to the patterns, or we come back analyzing it to the patterns and modus operandi that we already know. And we know lots of stories that were similar in a way. 1999 building bombings was similar. Dubrovka was definitely similar in terms of the part of the scene that was used. It was basically an attack on a theater. Back then, and we got Beslan, we got at least a couple of similar operations, and we know the traces of FSB agents or assets in those operations. Okay, my final question is not related directly to the event itself. You mentioned the flying of a Russian rocket over Polish territory and then flying back to the territory of Ukraine. But I would like to have your opinion about what is going on the Black Sea. we are talking about the intelligence reports from the British intelligence that are available online that the Black Sea Fleet is effectively inactive right now. And we are talking about 1/3 of Black Sea Fleet being just, well, all of those vessels are now submarines.
Yes.
What happened over there?
Well, what happened over there is those precision deep strike missile capabilities. Okay, it's Storm Shadow happened, Scalp happened, and if you give them ATACMS and the Taurus missiles, that's going to happen too. They're able to strike deep targets, and they're able to, in a sense, get rid of a capability. And that capability obviously is the Russian Navy. And it's not so much just the Navy, but some of those vessels are being used to fire ballistic missiles from off the coast. So they're removing them from the inventory. Others are landing ships that are bringing military equipment and personnel over from Russia to Crimea in order to provide the reinforcements for the forces that are being eradicated a little further north up in the Donbass. So it's significant. And it just continues to call for the fact that you have to have these deep strike precision weapon systems in order to interdict the flow of Russian forces into the country. You can fight them all day in the close fight, but if they're able to reinforce them, the fight never ends. You have to get them at the point in which they're arriving into the country. And that means you got to get them in Crimea. And equally as important, you got to get them in Russia. And right now, the United States and NATO are very hesitant and exceptionally weary of striking any targets in Russia with their weapon systems.
And actually, the effectiveness of those attacks is what we see right now. Thanks a lot. Thanks for your presence and your expertise. No, one more question. I don't know if you read, we didn't talk about this article, and so I'm not sure if you know the article that was published a couple of weeks ago in New York Times about the 10 years of cooperation between Ukraine intelligence and CIA. It was, at least from my perspective, a groundbreaking article. Things that were, of course, expected in a way, were published on basis of 200 interviews that were conducted by the journalists of New York Times. The claim is that this cooperation, the secret cooperation, was 10 years long and began in 2014 after Ukraine provided intel on the shooting down of MH17, and that CIA paid for 12 bases on the territory of Ukraine and helped create strategy and tactics to kick out Ruskies if they attack. And basically that this tactics was used in 2022 after Russia invaded Ukraine. I wonder, what is your take on this article and the information that were revealed?
Look, it's all in the realm of possibility. Okay, it certainly is. And look, it wouldn't just be CIA. You have to, when you go back and look, the U.S. military was in Ukraine for a period of time after 2014, training them on how to shoot the Javelin missiles, on how to operate other weapon capabilities. The UK had operators in the country that were helping them build their combat capability. So it wouldn't be a surprise to me that if an intelligence service came in to build another intelligence service, to build them up, to build their capabilities, particularly in the paramilitary and the special operations aspect of it. So all within the likelihood of possible on the intelligence side. But again, on the military side, we did have forces there that were training Ukrainians on weapon systems, as other allies did at the time too. So no, it's possible, absolutely.
The article is very interesting. I strongly recommend our viewers to read it if one wants to understand more of the complex situation in Ukraine invaded by Russia. Colonel, thank you very much for your time, your presence on Telewizja Republika. See you soon.
Okay, thanks for having me back on. I appreciate it.
Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, you can join us also on www.rachoń.com. That's our website. You can leave us your email there, and we will come back to you with our reports on the information about the front lines of the ongoing war against the West, the war that we try to cover on this program. We come back tomorrow or on Tuesday. It's not that clear yet. However, stay tuned. We're gonna be back.